Today, my guests are the Victim First Legal Services team from StopClergyAbuse.org. They've presented suit in Kansas City, Missouri. So let's get into this.
How firm a foundation, ye saints of the Lord, is laid for your faith in this excellent word. What more can he say than to you he has said, to you who for refuge to Jesus has fled?
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Firm Foundation Podcast. My name is Richard Moore. In this podcast, I talk about everything that's moving me in relation to church and theology, hopefully to assist you in building a firm foundation in Jesus Christ. Hey, before we go any further, if you wouldn't mind doing me a huge favor and clicking the like, hitting the subscribe, and smashing that bell, it helps YouTube get this content out to more people. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, the PR people at IHOP have told us that the crisis is over, but my guests today show us that the crisis is far from over at IHOP KC. They are from StopClergyAbuse.org. They reached out to me a little while ago. They wanted to come on today to present to us a case that they've filed, a suit that they filed in Kansas City, Missouri. They wanted to speak about it. So I wanted to give them a platform to speak about this, to interview them, to see what this case was about. And so today my guests are Caleb J. Aponte and Katie Fetzer. Caleb is an attorney specializing in justice for victims of sexual abuse, domestic violence, and human trafficking. He began his career as an assistant attorney general in Missouri, handling cases like consumer fraud, public corruption, and sex crimes. He was a founding member of the Attorney General's Anti-Trafficking Unit, leading a landmark anti-trafficking case. As a special assistant U.S. attorney, he prosecuted violent crimes and drug trafficking. Caleb serves on the Missouri Supreme Court's Combating Human Trafficking and Domestic Violence Commission. He also runs a boutique civil law practice representing abuse victims. Today we also have Katie Fetzer. Katie is a certified professional victim advocate with nearly a decade of experience supporting victims in and outside of the courtroom. She's an author, trainer, and consultant specializing in victim advocacy and prevention for children and vulnerable populations. Katie has worked in child protective services, domestic violence, sex trafficking, and clergy abuse cases, serving victims from disclosure all the way to justice. A survivor and adoptive mother of traumatized children, she co-founded Victim First organizations offering advocacy, prevention programs, and child safeguarding solutions. Katie provides training and consulting to diverse professionals, equipping them to protect children and advocate for victims effectively. All right, so thank y'all, Caleb and Katie, for taking your time today and spending some time with us from your organization, Stop Clergy Abuse Victim. And just to make sure from the front end, you guys are not, as an organization, connected to the advocate group, the original IHOP KC advocate group, but you are now, and my understanding, and I've received your suit and your filing. You are filing for victims of abuse with IHOP KC and Forerunner Church. But we'll jump into that in a moment. But tell us about yourselves, please. Maybe Katie, you ladies first. Tell us about yourself and maybe how you became part of this and your story, maybe a little bit, and just jump right in.
Yeah, so I'm a victim advocate. I've been serving victims on the front lines for nearly the last 10 years. And it started initially with Child Protective Services, starting to advocate for children who had been abused and neglected. I became a court-appointed advocate, really found a love for speaking for victims and navigating the complexities of those court processes and being a voice for the voiceless in a very tangible, practical way. It changed my life when I began to go down the road of advocacy. I began to see and know Jesus in a deeper and more profound way. And knowing him as an advocate really changed my life. And it's just something I've been around. I grew up in the church. My first disclosure that I ever received was from a friend at the age of 13 who was being sexually abused by her dad, who was a deacon in the church. Walked with many friends and walked with many people through the years, young women who have been horribly sexually abused in the church. And so that was just something that was always on my heart. I get into victim advocacy in child protective services. That has its levels of injustice that are very significant. And then this whole thing with IHOP blows up. And right away just started, diving into the trenches of getting involved and working with victims on the back end, and end up meeting Caleb. And we realized that we have a co-passion to help victims of clergy abuse. And then we just start kickstarting and working for the victims and the people that are trying to make sense of what this experience called IHOP has been.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Caleb, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit then too?
Yeah, so I'm an attorney, and my area of expertise is sex crimes and domestic violence, victim crimes. I grew up in the church, love the Lord. That's why I do what I do, because I think that Jesus spends, most of his thought energy on people who are marginalized, right? We know that from the Word, and I can't imagine who is more marginalized than somebody who is being, sexually abused by an intimate partner. And so decided to, go to law school, give my life to that. And when the IHOP case broke, I initially had hoped that they were going to do the right thing. After a few months, came to realize that that was not going to happen, and then was waiting for, somebody to show up and do the right thing, to waiting for the white knight to arrive, and then realized like, oh, there's nobody coming. And, took a step back and thought, okay, well, I have this extensive background in shepherding people through the legal process as a prosecutor, of prosecuting, sex crimes, and also a background in consumer protection. And the Lord kind of decided, like, hey, I've prepared you for this. I've given you a resume for this. It's time to step up. I ended up meeting Katie, and we realized that we shared the same philosophy in both theology and in victimology and being victim-centered and how to handle people. And so we decided to begin by using my law firm as a place where people could report abuse. So we did an announcement, I think about 9 months ago, on my Twitter, and we started taking intakes, and we've been doing intakes through word of mouth ever since. And about after the first few months, we realized this is a much bigger need than we realized. And so we decided to start Care Group, which is our not-for-profit legal services organization that we've just launched, that has as its express purpose to advocate for victims, and to give people a place where they can safely disclose, where they can tell their story under the protection of attorney-client privilege, where they can take that first step, and then we can help them figure out, okay, what are your next steps going to be? What do you want to do? What is going to lead to your healing? Do you want to chase accountability or not? But our goal is to give people a place to come and to start.
So y'all have been intaking people for 9 months in this particular sphere, in the IHOP story. Wow. Thank you.
Yes.
Just from a pastor's heart, thank you so much for setting yourself in this role and doing that as Christian professionals. And just thank you so much, first of all, from my side, to advocate for people who are the most vulnerable, the marginalized, like you said, Caleb. So thank you, guys. Thank you for taking some time here now. And so let's just jump right in to you have a current lawsuit. I have received that from your group, and I appreciate you sharing that with me. I would not have been able to see that otherwise. It's on public record now, though. So maybe, Caleb, why don't you just share with us, and then I'll go to Katie about maybe the dealing with this particular victim. So why don't you just tell us about the lawsuit, and then we'll jump to Katie.
So I'll tell you that I brought this lawsuit along with
Yeah. So
Boz,
your
on his
partnership with
local
Boss
council.
Tchividjian. Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah. I
Sure.
don't want to go into too much detail about the client because it is a minor, and I want to. We've gone through extensive, steps to
Yes.
protect that person's identity, but it is, I think, emblematic of the looking the other way and ignoring the problems that were persistent throughout IHOP. There's a situation at a sleepaway camp where my client reported multiple times to leaders escalating harassment from another student, and they ignored it and they looked the other way. And we have reason to believe this is far from the first time this has happened in a similar context. But there was a pervasive culture of, or at least we believe there was a pervasive culture of just blowing this stuff off, not taking it seriously, and then when something did happen, trying to just patch over it, minimize it. I can tell you that the reason my client and my client's parents really came forward to Boz and wanted to talk to an attorney is because this happened, as the stuff with Mike Bigelow broke, and from the stage, everybody's saying like, "Oh, we're taking this seriously, we're doing everything," and then in the background, they're like, "Oh, well, we should just meet with this other kid's parents. It's not a big deal. We just need to sort this out." And nobody's
A
actually
couple
taking it
things that I
seriously.
noticed on the suit as I read it were first things that there was no real safeguarding protocols in place. So it seems, and y'all are making this case in your lawsuit that there were no safeguarding protocols. There was no training on the front end of this retreat in this regard, and in abuse and or sexual assault or sexual impropriety regards. Tell us about that.
Well, as far as we can tell, there seems not to have been any training. If there was, and we're unaware of it, then it was completely disregarded. Because the client reported multiple times, went up the chain of leadership, brought it to every adult that he could's attention, and was repeatedly just blown off and told, "Oh, well, that kid just acts out a lot." So it would seem that there is either one of two things: either they didn't train at all, and there were no protocols, or if they did, nobody paid attention to the training, nor did they follow any of the protocols.
I hope a lot of my audiences are pastors, church leaders, and the like. And I would just encourage, if you don't have any protocols in place for safeguarding for abuse in any capacity, sexual, physical, emotional, spiritual abuse, then you must set those protocols into place right now.
100%. You've got to have protocols. And not only do you have to have protocols, you got to make sure that you actually follow those protocols, right?
Yeah.
You can't just have, the protocols on paper, but nobody ever reads them, nobody knows what they are. You got to train on them.
Yeah.
You got to drill on them. You got to make sure that everybody knows what they are. And then you got to actually follow them and implement them, because that's how you protect not only other people, but yourself, right? Because you can have a situation where a parent is upset and says, "Well, this is what I was told." And you can, if you're documenting properly and you're doing and taking steps, you can, follow your protocols, take steps to end, whatever incident is going on, document that well, so then you can show the parent, "Hey, well, I've got this 8-page report where we laid out everything that we did, and this is, what my people say that happened. And how does that compare with what the parent's coming upset at you about?" Right? So it's not just it is to protect the victims, but it protects everybody. And if you really do care about your sheep, and the people that you're pastoring, you've got to take the steps to protect them and to make sure that your staff knows what they're supposed to be doing.
I've had to report 3 instances as a pastor of abuse, and you have to, first of all, pastors are mandated reporters in almost every state. So these are protocols you have to put in place. And if a church doesn't have, I mean, if you go to the church you're going to, go ask your pastors, what are your safeguarding protocols, and approach them about it. And if they don't have any, then challenge them to put some in place immediately. So thank you for that, Caleb. Katie, tell us about the handling this case maybe, and what the challenges were and what you faced.
Well, I think this case is a great example of why we need professional advocates involved, and the difference between a professional versus someone who's using the title of advocate, but they don't have the professional skills and training. This was a particular case that was brought to me through a connection and through the work that I do. And so as a professional advocate, I knew what my role was. What my role was is to help give that family options and to talk to them about what they could do and help them make a peace-driven decision that was best for their family. And that was to direct them to Boz and Caleb in order for this case to be filed. And the things that people don't understand, especially when they're in these crossroads of decision, is that there's a view of, well, if I say something, it's not that big a deal, or we just want to move on. And the thing with a professional advocate is they come along and they really help broaden the view and go, wait a minute, what causes another minor to sexually assault another minor?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
This is problematic. Yeah. This is troubling. So beyond your own child, the other child involved in this situation, this needs to be looked into. This is not good.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Now,
this is so much bigger.
Go ahead.
And that's the part with victims in particular that I think I really want to just speak directly to, is that most of the time we feel like we're the only one. We're the only one who's experienced this, or it was something we did wrong, or it was, we've even been told by aggressors and abusers, you're the only one that feels this way. And really, the reality is that's very, very rare. That's next to never happens. Statistically,
and we know from Mike Bickle's situation that it was not only one case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so statistically, a national average is that an abuser will have 4 victims. That's the national average. Wow. But if an abuser is unrestrained and not caught, they can have as many as 400 in their lifetime. And
so that's really shocking.
Yes. And so it's
what I
go ahead.
I just was going to follow up with the particular details of the case. Correct me if I'm wrong, but did one sexual touching especially happen in a worship service? Or in a worship time? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
I mean, the hubris you have to have. So you're talking, Katie, about this unrestrained abuser is touching someone, another young person, another minor, sexually in a worship experience, and either no one's noticing, or I don't know what is happening in that scenario, but the sexual touching that is described is so egregious that it has. I mean, wow, it's just really, really shocking. So I don't know if that's a question or not. That's just wow. I was so shocked. Mm-hmm. And so it shows there's no restriction on this. There's no one even noticing, maybe, or someone's noticing and turning the other eye. This is really, really, I was really shocked, honestly, reading the brief.
Well, evil doesn't know limits.
That's
evil
right.
doesn't know boundaries. And that's the thing that we always think it will. It will honor a boundary, or it will honor limits, where it won't cross certain lines. And that's not true. Evil knows no limits.
So just for my audience, again, just to reiterate, this sexual touching did take place in a worship experience over this retreat weekend that was provided by IHOP Forerunner Church. It is beyond the pale, in my opinion. So let me pose this question now. I was under the impression that IHOP KC and Forerunner Christian Fellowship dissolved or disbanded? How does that affect your suit and the pursuit of justice in this case? Caleb, maybe you can speak to that.
It's unclear if they've actually disbanded.
Okay. That's what I was wondering too. Yeah.
Missouri Secretary of State's website, they were still incorporated and operating. So they do have insurance coverage. So the insurance companies usually step in and take over these claims. That's what the insurance company is for. Yeah, there's also, as a part of standard litigation practice, there's this thing called litigation hold, where you inform an entity that your client's considering litigation. And so those are sent out really early on in the process to make sure that documents are preserved and nothing's destroyed. And so we sent one of those out really early on in the process to make sure that things wouldn't disappear. And so those are the steps that you can take to prevent things from, like a dissolution, from getting rid of all the evidence.
I was thinking, sorry, in my, kind of the bad part of my mind, the bad place, that, they're shredding documents and holding magnets to computers and all this type of stuff. But I guess that those steps help prevent losing documents.
They're supposed to, and if things do, get lost or disappear, then there's remedies.
Okay.
For that built into our legal system, because our legal system is designed to pursue justice.
Great. All right, that's perfect, and I'm so glad that those things are there for us to be able to pursue justice. So that's great. Now, maybe Katie, you can help us with this. What's the difference between trauma-informed and trauma-aware? So help us with that. That was given to me as a question. You're going to teach me today, so help us out.
Well, that's a really good question, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about those differences. So trauma-aware is when we're aware of people's trauma, that people have trauma, that they have reactions as a result of trauma. So if someone is responding in a way that we don't understand, or maybe they're having a different reaction than what we would, or they're they're just overall going, what is that? Like, why are you handling this that way? That is what trauma aware is being able to go, oh, your trauma is causing you to respond differently. It's the awareness that trauma alters the way we respond, right? So, or even understanding the 4 trauma responses of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. These are being aware that the way we respond to trauma is unique and it's different. Trauma.
Can you unpack those steps you just mentioned real quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. So fight, flight, and freeze are much easier to understand. Most people, basically the words themselves describe them. You get in a fight and you claw it out, and you do whatever you got to do. Most of the time it's pretty loud and pretty overt.
And is that step one? That's the person has been traumatized. They realize they have fangs and claws and they start going at it. Is that the first step typically?
No, it's not a step. Okay. So we each can respond to trauma in different ways at different times, right? So for example, when someone is going after my kids, I go into fight mode. My mama bear hat comes on and I'm full on fight. Nothing else is present in that moment, right? Yep. Doesn't matter if they're touching buttons of my own trauma. I'm full on fight because it's my kids, right? Another example of that would be if someone comes after, like, me personally at a deep level, I tend to freeze or fawn. And so my responses change based on what's coming at me. And so being a trauma aware is understanding that our responses to these different situations and others' responses to these situations change based on what's happening. So you might even have a fighter, but in this particular situation, they're freezing. So this is what a lot of people don't understand, especially about sexual assault or abuse, is they go, well, they're strong, they're a fighter, and they are. But in this particular situation, they're freezing.
Right.
And so being trauma aware goes, we understand that. And when we interact with people who are victims, we don't rush to judgment, right?
Yeah.
So fawning is the more complicated side of it. Fawning is where they tend to kind of go back into themselves, shut down, and actually make excuses or justify the harm.
Hmm.
And so they internalize it and they go, well, this is my fault. Or if I had done this differently. And sometimes in the professional world, we call it betrayal blindness. And so you're betrayed, but you can't see it because you keep giving the aggressor or the abuser a pass because you go, well, they're really a good person or they're really kind. And so then we fawn, and then that causes us to have a form of disassociation and go, well, then it must be my fault. It must be something with me, or it's my brokenness, or it's my trauma. And so all of these different factors come into play. And so fawning is very complicated. And fawning is a very common response with people that have former trauma, especially childhood trauma. So for like me, I'm a fighter by nature, but when I get into certain situations, I can fawn very easily. Does that make sense?
This all makes complete sense. And I notice every single one of those in every single victim that I've had encounters with through my platform, and or the victims of, let's say, Mike Bickle that we know throughout years. Why did these people not come forward? They were fawning, or they were afraid because he was a power structure and he was speaking as
Right.
one for God. I mean, he had gone to heaven, right? He had gone
Yes.
to heaven in his golden chariot or whatever, so these are real things that people actually had fear for coming forward, because either they would miss what God had for them, or they would be judged, or whatever the case may be. He was holding an immense power over people in all these areas. And I've seen all those steps in the victims.
Well,
So,
then you also have to understand there's a lot of social pressures involved in a situation like IHOP. So everyone thinks someone like Mike Bickle is amazing, right? And you're going, well, maybe I overreacted, or maybe I'm being too critical.
yeah.
And then you're hearing messages about dealing with criticism and jealousy. And you're hearing messages about how anger is not right. And you need to be kind, and you need to be meek and broken and mild and humble. And you go, okay, well, I just need to take this before the Lord. And so this is where the twisting of scripture and is just really, really, really damaging to victims in a clergy abuse situation, because you're already taking a very psychologically abusive situation and you're putting it on steroids by then twisting scripture and then someone's view of God.
Yeah.
So that's the trauma awareness. Trauma informed is where professionals understand not only that trauma awareness, but we know how to pivot our interactions with a victim in order to meet a victim where they are. So we see this a lot in the difference between a professional space and like a liaison space, right? The professionals actually know you have to turn off your own story. You have to take off your own hat, so to speak.
Okay.
And you have to step outside of yourself and step into the world of that victim and be victim centered in the way you respond and the way you handle their story. And that takes a collaborative environment with professionals. That's not something you can do on your own rogue. Even with trauma informed training, it's theory until you put it in practice in a collaborative environment. And
so
that's really important.
Awesome. And so we're trying to move from trauma aware, being aware that what trauma is and what its effects are, towards being trauma informed. Is that what we're trying to move toward? And or professionals?
Yeah, we're trying to delineate the differences between professional advocacy and professionals aiding victims and well-meaning individuals who are trying to help.
So in other words, the advocate group, the IHOP advocate group, the people who first stepped forward, they were advocating for people, but they were not a group of professionals And we want to hand off to folks like you, victims who actually, who are, you guys are professionals and you can legally represent as well. So taking that next step, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you guys very much. Let me ask you this, because move on to this lawsuit type stuff again. And Caleb, maybe you can deal with this a little more. Will there be more forthcoming lawsuits? Do you guys seemingly representing quite a bit of people? I don't know the number, if you're able to share how many people you have intaked, but please share if there'll be more forthcoming lawsuits.
That is something that I can't really get into.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me ask you this then, though. You said for 9 months you've been intaking people, but so you do have other people who you are representing, and you would be willing. Are you able and capable of taking on more and intaking more folks? Because I would love to send people towards you if I can.
Yes, we're definitely able to take on more people, and that is why we launched Care Group.
Okay.
Because we realized that there was nobody in this space who was doing this. And so we've launched Care Group. It is a not-for-profit, donor-funded, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we are in the process of raising money so that we can do this full-time. You know, everybody on my team has a full-time job that they do separate from this, and we are doing this in our spare time.
Sure.
Right? So I have a full-time lawyer job as a prosecutor where I am prosecuting sex crimes and domestic violence and trials, right? And then after I get home, you know, at 7 o'clock at night, I'm jumping on the phone with Katie and spending my Saturday doing intakes with her. You know, Katie runs a not-for-profit.
Yeah.
We all wear multiple hats. And so the goal in launching Care Group is to expand our capacity to be able to take on more people, but we are still continuing to take intakes from IHOP.
So you do have capacity, and you're trying to expand your bandwidth as well to take on more. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I would definitely, just in my talks with these folks and the other people behind the scenes during our time, I would definitely recommend you go, if you are thinking about taking that step as a victim, please reach out, and we'll give y'all's information toward the end of our time. So I just encourage any victims who want to take that step to have their story and to investigate even their own understanding, meet with Katie, meet with these guys, and take that step and just see where the Lord will lead you, and how how this could go. So let's talk about the victims that y'all have experienced and or just seen in general. What are the common trends among the clergy abuse typically, and then specifically with IHOP? What are some trends among clergy abuse first, and then specifically to IHOP? I don't know, either one of you can take that.
So one of the trends that we're seeing is delay in disclosure, right? So and significant delay in disclosure. I think delayed disclosures, we know in the abuse world, are already extremely common. The majority of people either never disclose or have a really delayed disclosure. In this specific case around IHOP, we're seeing even longer than usual delays in disclosure. And I think that is because of the dynamics that you addressed about people feeling that the people who are doing the abusing are endorsed by God. And so they're running into this paradox of, I've been abused and this feels wrong, but also this person that is abusing me is performing miracles and prophesying and seems to have God's endorsement. So like, I don't know what to do with this. So they're, you know, very understandably kind of getting stuck in a freeze position. Like, I don't know where to go. And then through this coming to light, some of the people who've had a longer time, you know, a decade plus to process, are actually at a place where they're starting to come forward and tell their stories. So I think the delayed disclosure is something that you would expect to see and see regularly, but I think it's been exacerbated in this case.
Let me just ask a question in between then. How does the statute of limitations on sex crimes affect those delayed disclosures? Is there the things that stand out? Then they delay 10, 15, 20 years. Do the statute of limitations apply and things like that? Tell us about that a little bit.
So in Missouri, specifically in the early 2000s, they finally got rid of the statute of limitations on sex crimes. And so in Missouri, every crimes are prosecuted on a county level, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so every county prosecutor who's elected is basically, when it comes to criminal justice, in their own little kingdom where they get to decide what gets filed, what doesn't get filed. And so I would encourage people, if a crime is committed, reach out to us. We are happy to help you navigate going to the police. And then it's really up to the prosecutor to decide if it's a case that they think they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And then there's also the civil process, right? Because in America, we have two parallel legal processes. Criminal legal process, the state is technically the victim, is the entity that has standing, right? We'll say the state is the entity that was sinned against by the crime. So you may be the victim, but it's the state that was, damaged because you're a member of the state and they're the ones who bring it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for prison time. In the civil system, it's you're the person, right? The victim is the client, the person who is seeking restitution, and that's for monetary damages. And so those statute of limitations, unfortunately, in Missouri are very short.
Okay.
5 years for negligence, 2 years for intentional torts.
Okay.
The windows to pursue those, again, are very short. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to launch CARE, is because there's a long delay in disclosure and a short window for suing. And so there's a lot of people who need help and may want legal advice, right?
Yeah.
But there's nobody they may pass statute of limitations. They don't have, the ability to bring a monetary lawsuit. And, there's a lot of lawyers out there, but they got to put food on their tables.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to create a space where that's not an issue, that's, funded by people who care about this issue, so that everybody can get access to some legal advice,
right?
A safe place to tell their story and get connected to other resources.
That's awesome. So, Katie, from your side, what do you see in the difference between typical clergy abuse and maybe the IHOP victims that you've met so far and have seen so far?
I would say significant confusion. There's always confusion with clergy abuse, but the dynamics of the prophetic history combination with a culture that was very strong in sensationalism, superiority, inferiority, all of those different elements, it really creates a significant amount of confusion.
Wow.
What is so exciting about something like the CARE group that we're launching is that victims no longer have to wait for third-party investigations. They don't have to wait for suits. They don't have to take the initiative to go try to find an attorney that understands these complexes and nuances. That's the benefit of CARE, is that victims have a place to come right away with their story, no matter where they are in their level of processing, and they remain in 100% control of their story.
Right.
So there's a misunderstanding that if someone comes to a law firm, that they have to file suit. And through a traditional law firm, that is the case. But with CARE, we're designing it specifically where it is victim-centered. So that means that victim remains in control. So if we do an intake with a story with the victim and they have a case that can have legal action and they don't want it, we will not pressure them.
Yeah.
We're there to serve the victim and the victim first. We're not willing to exploit a victim who's already been exploited. And
so you're able to fund your work through other means that are not necessarily litigation, and that's that's really incredible, and that's what victims need. They need that ability to say no. I can't do this, and I'm not going to go to litigation. That's incredible.
Well, and that donor-supported platform means that we don't wear the normal attorney hats. We're not driven by what is able to make money. We're driven by what true injustice, all levels of injustice, not just the ones that make money. And that's really important for victims to be validated and heard that all levels of abuse, not just sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, is damaging. And that's the part that is just, I get really passionate about for victims, is especially in the IHOP situation. So many of them are such a level of confusion and they don't feel like they have a place to go. So let's just put ourselves in their shoes for a minute. Say they're still at IHOP and their entire community is focused on IHOP and being a part of that culture. They don't have anywhere to go or anyone to talk to. And they see the people that have left and they go, well, I don't necessarily want to walk away from my faith. I don't necessarily think the prayer room is wrong. What do I do with my story? And so what ends up happening is a lot of people end up shoving their story down and go, well, for the sake of the mission or for the sake of the prayer movement, I'm just going to heal, trust Jesus, and I'm going to move on. But the problem is you can't stuff pain. It becomes a volcano. You have to process it. Even if you look through the Gospels and begin to see Jesus process pain, he grieved and he taught his disciples to grieve and to process pain. And so that is a misunderstanding, especially in a lot of these charismatic movements, is that you just have to forgive and move on. It doesn't work that way. There's a reason why it says he binds the wounds of the brokenhearted, right? That there's a mending process. It's not an overnight instant healing with emotional healing. So what I love about the care model is that victims can come, even if they don't even call themselves a victim. They may even be an individual who just goes, I'm not a victim. I wasn't sexually abused, but hey, I was in this situation and it shook me and I'm still not the same a year later. And I don't know how to process this. And I don't know what this was because there's so much confusion. I need help. What do I do with what happened to me or what I witnessed? And I don't even know how to even begin to dissect and process what happened. And a lot of times those intake processes are just allowing a safe place where they can say anything because of that attorney-client privilege. Even if they were coerced into doing something illegally or immorally wrong.
Right.
They are still protected. This is why the attorney-client privilege is so important for victims. Because what people do not understand with victimology and the way this works, aggressors and abusers often pull their victims into immoral and illegal activities so they will never disclose.
Exactly. So they feel guilty of doing something that they know is maybe wrong, but they were victimized in that process. And they say, well, I can't go forward because I was drinking or I was doing something illegal or I was doing something else.
Exactly.
Yeah. And they used that. And actually, Mike Bickle had used that same thing to hold over his victims to remain silent. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
So that attorney-client privilege is for the protection of the victim. Like, that's what people don't understand. That attorney-client privilege protects we are bound by law to protect that victim's story.
Yeah.
They stay in control, not us. We don't determine what happens to their story. They do. Wow. And that's empowering. That's the first responsibility that as advocates, as professional advocates, is that we do, is we restore victims' choice. We restore their voice. We restore back to them what the perpetrator stole from them. And we say, no, this is your autonomy before God. God gives you a choice. Even throughout the timeline of biblical, he always gives us a choice. And it's the first thing perpetrators take is your choice. Yeah. And so as a group, how did we come along and then do the exact same thing for a just cause? No, we can't do that. We can't exploit the exploited. We have to serve them. And we have to give them that power of choice and give them that protected place to release their voice and determine what happens next.
Thank you so much for that answer. I want to respect you guys' time. We're getting to the end here of our hour, but can I ask a few more questions? I have two more questions. One would be, what kind of preparation should churches have in place to prevent such exploitation and abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, etc.? Can you give us a few pointers?
They should have extensive preparation, and it is a complex issue, and I don't think I could give you a few.
You know what? You know what? Maybe we'll just have you back on the show another time. We can go into that because that would really be helpful for churches to know what to do. I mean, churches want to do the right thing, I think, for the most part. So let's maybe just invite you back on another time and we'll try to go through and what should churches even legally have in place and the like, and even as well on your side, Katie. Maybe we'll just have that. How do we get more victims in general to come forward? What are things that we can do just as regular people, pointing people towards you as professionals? What help us out with that?
I guess that's something that you want me to answer.
Yeah, maybe.
The big thing is to have empathy,
Yeah.
real heartfelt empathy, and don't rush. Like we tend to, when we hear someone's story, try to determine if it's truth. And what ends up happening is it filters our ability to hear the heart of the individual. So the first thing that we all can do to be trauma aware is to listen without an investigative hat on, and to really listen to the heart of the victim and look at the damage, look at their emotional distress, and point them in the direction of professionals. This is important that a full disclosure is done by professionals, because it just is, because the way we respond to victims when they disclose their full story, many victims report, is as damaging or more damaging than the victimization itself. Wow. And we have to be very careful with how we handle victims, and we need to understand, because we tend to compare. It's our natural human tendency is to compare. So the way I like to describe it when I train advocates is, say you have two pitchers of glass and they both are getting hit by a hammer. One glass is made up of different elements and it breaks off in large chunks. Another glass that you hit with the same hammer in the same way with the same velocity might shatter. Mm-hmm. And so what we tend to do is we look at the hammer and the act and go, well, you are here in pieces, but you're shattered. This isn't adding up. And so then we bring a negative bias to the victim because of their response to that trauma. And each person is different. The makeup of each person, if they've had complex childhood trauma previously, which we do see a lot with the IHOP victims, their responses are going to be different. But not only that, the way they're handling their story is so important, because if you're not very careful in the way you respond to a disclosure, it can really devastate a victim even worse and really cause them to spiral. So the best thing to do is to know our limits, like know where our roles are, and to understand, like, hey, I can have empathy for you. I can feel for you. I'm not here to determine truth. I'm just here to support you. I'm here to love you. I'm here to tell you that this is not who Jesus is. This is not the Jesus of the Bible who's okay with harm to you. That's not who he is. And he would want you to have help, and he would want you to have your voice restored, because that's who our God is. And so here is a resource for you to talk to someone to flush out whatever level of detail of your story that you need to. And I'm here to be your cheerleader and support you along that pathway.
That's so great. Thank you for that. One more question to you, Caleb, if you don't mind asking. You have been doing this professionally for quite some time, it seems like, especially dealing with sex crimes. How do you just personally stay sane in this thing? You must see some details that are just overwhelming. Please help us understand how you can stay above it. I mean, spiritually, even just how do you?
I get this question a lot. It is because I fully believe that I'm partnering with Jesus and what is most important to him. And because I have the ability to do something about it. I think if I was hearing these stories and could not do anything to further the cause of justice or to seek accountability, then it would drive me nuts, and that it would be too much. But fortunately, I have a law license and a job where I get to file lawsuits, I get to file charges, I get to actually seek accountability and justice. And so hearing these stories for a purpose, and that purpose being a partnership with Jesus, takes something that I think would normally be a very heavy burden and actually makes it a very light burden, and something that I am able to carry. And that because I am partnering with Jesus and seeing his kingdom established in the earth through holding these perpetrators accountable.
Wow. Amazing. So let me close up here. How can we support you? How can just my regular viewer support the work you're doing, even financially? And then where could people reach out to you? Let's say victims and or others just reaching out saying thank you and God bless. Maybe just someone wants to send you an encouraging email. How can we support you and how can we reach you?
If you'd like to go to our website, stopclergyabuse.org. We have the donor links there and also the ways to reach out to us and contact us. We would love to hear from all of you. And obviously any donations are appreciated, because we're in the process of launching and fundraising so that we can do this full time and expand our capacity to help victims. We know that clergy abuse is rampant, unfortunately, across the world. And so while there are tons of people from IHOP that need help, we also know that there's tons of people in other churches that aren't getting tons of media attention that need help. And we want to create a place nationally and globally where people, where victims of clergy abuse can safely come and get help and get direction and counsel.
Perfect. So please, if you're watching this to this point, please reach out to them at stopclergyabuse.org. That's stopclergyabuse.org. My guests today have been Katie Fetzer and Caleb Aponte. Thank you guys so much for your time. God bless you. We'll just be keeping track of this case as well. And maybe we'll have another time to come on and we can talk about preparation for churches and prevention and all this other stuff. Love to have you all again. Thank you so much. God bless y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that on Jesus has leaned for